They thought he was just another stubborn old man. He sat cuffed in court silent, bruised, forgotten. His clothes were torn. His name wasn't even on the docket. To the young cops, he was nobody. A vagrant. A problem to move along. But the man they'd arrested had once worn the trident of a Navy SEAL. What followed was not a courtroom drama. It was a reckoning. Because when the back doors opened and a 4-star general walked in, the silence hit harder than a gavel. He didn't come to grandstand. He came to apologize for all the times men like Walter Briggs were asked to bleed, then told to disappear. This is not a story about a trial. It's a story about memory, about quiet men with battlefield scars and no one left to ask how they got them. It's about a forgotten sniper, classified missions, a courtroom that never expected a salute, and the officer who finally gave him one. If you believe honor should outlive medals, if you believe service doesn't expire when the war ends, then this story is yours, because some warriors never stop serving. They just wait for someone to see them and remind the world what dignity and silence really looks like. He sat on a cold stone bench, hands folded, head low. The courthouse rose behind him like a concrete fortress, blind to the man at its steps. His boots were worn, his coat older than most who passed him. No one asked his name. No one offered help. He didn't need help. He needed to be left alone. The flag overhead rippled in the wind. Red, white, blue, colors he had once bled for. He looked up only once that morning. Just a glance. A flicker of something buried deep, then gone. The town moved around him, fast and forgetful. Lawyers, deputies, interns, all blind to the man who had once moved mountains in places they'd never pronounce. 2 officers spotted him. Mid-30s, buzz cuts, matching patrol jackets. They exchanged a look. Didn't recognize his face. Didn't notice the boots polished despite the mud. Didn't see the rigid posture, even while seated. They just saw a man sitting still too long near a government building. And stillness, in their world, meant trouble. One approached. "Sir, you can't stay here." The old man didn't respond. Not defiant, just distant. "Need you to move along," the other added. Still nothing. The first officer stepped forward, a little more force in his voice now. "You need to leave." Right now? The old man blinked slowly, just resting. Calm, controlled. That made them nervous. Authority doesn't like calm in places it expects submission. One reached out, tapped his arm. The old man's hand twitched, reflex, not resistance. The officer stepped back, radioed something quick. Moments later, they moved in together. He stood without protest, no argument, no words. They cuffed him like they'd done it 100 times. Because they had. The cuffs clicked shut, cold on the wrists. The old man didn't flinch. His eyes found the flag one more time as they walked him away. The bench behind him sat empty, silent. One of the officers chuckled, shaking his head. "Always these old guys," he muttered, "think the rules don't apply." The other laughed, but quieter. At the station, he gave no name. Offered no ID, said little. Just that his phone had died. Wanted to charge it. That's why he'd been near the outlet on the courthouse wall. The officers rolled their eyes, wrote it up as loitering, possible vagrant. They didn't look closer. They didn't check the tattoo under his sleeve. The holding cell was small, concrete walls, steel bench. He sat there without complaint, still cuffed. No call, no lawyer. Just silence. One officer entered John Doe into the system. The fingerprint scanner failed to read. Old scars confused the machine. No match in any database. They logged him as homeless and moved on to the next case. Later, he was loaded into a transport van with 2 other men who brawled behind a liquor store. The van rattled over potholes as they drove to the courthouse. He stared ahead, unmoved, hands still bound. The other 2 whispered to each other. He said nothing. One glanced at him and muttered, "Creepy how quiet he is." They led him into the courtroom. Empty gallery. Bored judge. Public defender half asleep. The kind of court that handles noise complaints and unpaid parking tickets. Nobody knew the weight walking into their space that day. He was seated at the defense table, still cuffed. The arresting officers leaned on the back wall, arms crossed like proud schoolboys. The judge barely looked up. Name? Silence. Sir, do you have an attorney? More silence. The public defender shrugged. Your Honor, I haven't had time to review the file. We request a short recess. The judge sighed, nodded. 5 minutes. He leaned back, sipped lukewarm coffee. Another day, another nobody. Until someone in the back of the room stood up. Alan was 24, Marine Reserve, grew up on base. His father served, his uncle too. Now he worked clerical in the county courthouse. Not glamorous, but solid. He'd watched the old man enter, felt something itch in his chest. Something about his posture, the way he didn't flinch. Alan couldn't shake it. So he walked out. In the hallway, he pulled his phone and made a call. A contact at the Pentagon, not official. Just a friend of his father's. I've got an old guy in court. No ID. Says nothing. But the tattoo, it looks like seal insignia. Original. There was silence on the other end. Then the voice said, describe him. Alan did, quietly. The scars, the calm, the trident mark. Another pause. Then, don't let them move forward. I'll call someone now. Alan walked back inside. Sat down, heart hammering. He didn't know what was about to happen, only that something was. He glanced at the clock. 9:42 a.m. the judge throat, ready to proceed. At 9:43, the doors opened. 2 aides entered first. Then came the general. Full dress uniform, ribbons across his chest, shoulders squared, eyes forward. His boots struck the tile with absolute purpose. Every man in the room turned. Even the prosecutor dropped his pen. The judge froze. The silence was total, heavy, like the pause before an order is given in combat. The general stopped just inside the bar. Your Honor, he said, voice firm, calm, unwavering. Request permission to address the court. The judge stood halfway. State your name for the record. General Marcus Weller, United States Army, retired. A breath. I'm here on behalf of the defendant. He turned his eyes to the old man. Walter still hadn't looked up. General Weller took a step forward. The man seated before you is Staff Chief Walter Briggs, United States Navy SEAL, Team 2, active from 1971 to 2002. SEAL Sniper. Confirmed operations in Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq. Recipient of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, Joint Service Commendation. One of the last original SEAL snipers still alive. The courtroom didn't breathe. The judge blinked. Looked at the folder in front of him like it might change shape. He's here ... for charging a phone. He asked quietly. Weller nodded once. On a sidewalk. Outside your courthouse. He turned his head to the back. While 2 officers cuffed him like a criminal, the silence deepened. One officer shifted, face flushing. Weller stepped beside the defense table. Chief Briggs, he said, voice shifting. You pulled my brother from a burning Humvee in Kandahar, refused medevac, saved 3 men under fire. I've waited 15 years to thank you. Walter looked up slowly. His eyes held no surprise, just quiet recognition. He made it. Weller nodded. He did. Because of you. The judge cleared his throat. This isn't standard procedure, General. No, sir, Weller replied, but it's necessary. He looked at the bailiff. Remove those cuffs. The bailiff hesitated. Now, the cuffs were removed. Walter rubbed his wrist, said nothing. All charges, Weller said, turning to the bench, are to be dropped. This man's name sealed and protected. The judge nodded slowly. Done. One of the officers opened his mouth. Weller turned his head just enough. Next time, he said softly, ask who you're touching before you grab someone's arm. The officer said nothing. Walter stood, jacket folded, face blank, but his shoulders were straighter now. Not proud, just settled, like something had returned to its rightful place. He walked out of the courtroom without a word. Weller followed him to the door but didn't speak again. Just watched him go. Watched the way he moved. The world outside didn't know what had happened. Didn't know the man who passed him by had once operated in shadows, eliminated threats, and saved lives they'd never hear about. Walter didn't go straight home. He drove past his turnoff, past the shops, past the gas station, all the way to the edge of the Veterans Cemetery. He parked, engine running, and stared across the stones. On the passenger seat sat a coin, heavy, etched metal, given by Weller just before they parted. On the back were 4 words. Your silence was never wasted. He didn't smile, didn't cry, just let it sit there. Let the weight of that day settle, not because he needed validation, not even because someone remembered, but because for the first time in decades, the world had looked twice. And then that small, quiet recognition ... something open. Something that had been locked away for too long. Later that week, word spread, not loud, not viral, just quietly among those who would understand. At a SEAL training compound 2 states over, instructors told the story, without naming him. He didn't speak because he didn't need to, they said. And when the time came, someone else spoke for him. Recruits stood a little taller that day. At the local VFW, a grainy photo appeared on the wall. Black and white, a sniper team in a jungle pass. Below it, a handwritten note. He never asked to be known, so we won't name him. But we remember. And at the courthouse, no one spoke of the day the general walked in. But they all remembered. Allen received a package at his apartment. No return address. Inside, a first edition book, SEAL Team History, declassified. Inside the cover, a folded sheet of paper, not signed. Just typed in courier font. You look closer. Most don't. That matters. He pinned it to his fridge, never said a word. But he never forgot. Walter returned to his routines. Same truck, same tools, same coffee, but now those who passed him noticed. He stood straighter, moved a little slower, but with purpose, not proud, not loud, just present, like a man who had been seen. And once a month, he returned to that courtroom, sat quietly in the back, not to be noticed, but to notice. Because maybe, just maybe, another man might need what he was once denied. A second look. He'd been booked like any other vagrant. No fuss, no resistance. Just a quiet old man processed in under 20 minutes. The file read transient. That word stuck to him like dirt. No home, no family, no job. The kind of man courts forget. But there were clues, small things that didn't add up. No one bothered to look. The jacket was military issue, but from an era most officers hadn't lived through. The boots' jungle grade still held sand from somewhere far away. And the tattoo under his wrist? Old Navy ink, sun-faded. Most assumed it was just decoration, a relic, a fading story, but it wasn't. It was a warning. One meant for men who knew better. The sergeant processing intake glanced at the man's paperwork. Nothing pinned, no priors, no warrants. Clean, he said, tossing the folder on a growing stack. Another man lost in the shuffle. He didn't even get a phone call. Just a bench in a holding room that smelled of bleach and boredom. Still, he didn't complain. Didn't ask. Down the hall, 2 deputies laughed about the arrest. Didn't even flinch, one said, like he wanted it. The other shrugged, probably looking for a warm place to sleep. They moved on to the next thing, a fight outside a pool hall. Nobody thought twice about the quiet man who hadn't spoken a word since sunrise. In the security room, a rookie watched the footage. Playback from the courthouse steps. The man sitting, then standing, then cuffed. Something in the footage stuck with him. It was the stillness, the way he stood without being told. The way he offered his wrist, like it was all routine. The rookie watched it twice more, uneasy. His supervisor walked by. You good? The rookie nodded, minimized the video, and went back to filing. But the image stayed with him, that silence, that readiness. Not submission. Training. Muscle memory. The kind of posture no homeless man should have had, but it was already past noon. Time to move on. They had other names to process. By mid-afternoon, the man sat alone. Lights flickered overhead. A sandwich was offered. He declined. Water? 1 sip. That was all. Still no name. No requests. Just a steady stare at the wall like it held some kind of code only he could read. They left him there until the van arrived. Like all the others. Outside, the van driver smoked a cigarette with his foot on the bumper. What's he in for? He asked casually. The officer shrugged. Loitering. Courthouse bench. Wouldn't move. The driver laughed. Old guys. Always think they're above the law. Nobody responded. The door slammed. Chains clinked. The engine started. A quiet man vanished behind tinted glass. No one filed a complaint. No one asked why he was detained. No missing person report was entered. No lawyer called. No press. Just another anonymous arrest in a system that ran like a machine efficient, blind, cold. If not for one clerk, one ordinary man, he might have disappeared. His name unspoken, his history erased. Another ghost in boots. That clerk was Ryan, 35, divorcee, former Army, admin, quiet, reliable, the kind of man others forgot in conversation. But he noticed things. That morning, he noticed a man's eyes. Not scared, not confused, alert, like someone who'd done Overwatch 1,000 times. That wasn't vagrant behavior. That was battlefield memory. Ryan didn't speak, but he watched. You walk past the holding cell window, pause. Watch the old man breathe slow, deliberate, not broken, not ashamed. Just waiting, like a soldier waiting for a mission brief. Ryan felt something twist in his gut. A memory from Kabul. A man with the same stare, same posture, the kind of soldier they call ghosts. Because they never bragged. Back at his desk, Ryan ran a quiet background search. Just out of curiosity. No name. No prints. Nothing. Frustrating. He leaned back, thinking. Then typed in a keyword. Seal tattoo identification. The screen filled with images, insignia, history, archive patches. He scrolled slowly. There it was. Matched perfectly. Vietnam-era SEAL Team Trident. Scarred into the man's wrist. He sat still for a moment, then stood up. Walked to his supervisor. Something's off about that John Doe in holding. The supervisor barely looked up. We get weirdos every week, man. Process and move on. Ryan hesitated. I think he's former special ops. SEAL, maybe. The supervisor laughed. That so? Well, if he's that special, he'll get out. Ryan didn't argue. Just nodded and walked away. But he didn't stop thinking. That man didn't belong in holding. He didn't belong in cuffs. He belonged in Arlington or in some quiet home with metals collecting dust, not processed like street trash. Ryan stared at his screen. The cursor blinked. He started typing. Something needed to be done. The file sat open. John Doe, estimated age, 65 to 75. No priors, no ID, non-compliant. Ryan added one line. Possible veteran. Then another, observe closely. Possible cognitive PTSD. It wasn't much, but it would trigger a secondary review if someone read it. He clicked save, shut off his monitor, and for the first time in months, felt something right. Down the hall, the old man was led out of the holding room. Still silent, still cuffed. He didn't look at anyone, but as he passed Ryan's desk, their eyes met, just for a moment. And in that moment, Ryan saw it. Recognition, not of his face, but of what he'd done. Walter gave him the smallest nod. The next morning, Ryan checked the file. A red flag had appeared, internal flag only. Review required by Veteran Affairs Liaison. He leaned forward, confused. They didn't even have a liaison anymore. Budget cuts. The alert shouldn't have triggered. But it had. He clicked through. Saw a name he didn't recognize. Then his phone rang. The voice on the line was calm, deep. Is this Ryan Tate? Yes. You entered a secondary note on a John Doe yesterday? Ryan hesitated. Yeah. Why? Because that note saved his name from being erased. A pause. Do not touch that file again. Everything from here is being handled off record. The line went dead. Ryan sat frozen. At the station, the officer who arrested Walter was called into the captain's office. The door closed behind him. 30 minutes passed. When he exited, his face was pale. He didn't speak. Just grabbed his jacket and walked out. Nobody knew what was said, but word spread fast. The quiet old man? Yeah, he wasn't just anyone. The sergeant who had processed him got a call too. Different tone, not angry, curious. A man from Washington asking about the intake logs. Very polite, very specific. Wanted times, dates, badge numbers. The sergeant gave him everything. You didn't run a full ID? The voice asked. No match came up. The voice didn't judge. Just said, thank you. Behind the scenes, calls bounced between agencies. Old logs were scanned. Old clearance codes reactivated. Walter Briggs' name hadn't crossed the government system in over a decade. For good reason. He was buried under 17 layers of quiet. A man forgotten by design, but some silences are only temporary. Especially when earned in blood. At a secure base in Virginia, a man received a text. He surfaced. No name. Just a phrase. He exhaled. Opened a drawer. Pulled out a worn leather binder with one word stamped in faded gold. Brothers. Inside, Walter's photo. Younger. Angrier. But unmistakable. The man closed the drawer, stood up, and began making calls. Back at the courthouse, Ryan walked past a holding bench. Empty now. The ghost was gone. But something had shifted. The deputies weren't joking anymore. The rookie in security asked about Navy insignia. And in the hallway, someone posted a small note near the wall. Be slow to judge silence. No name, but everyone knew who it was about. Walter didn't speak about what happened. He never would. But from that day forward, people noticed. Officers nodded as he passed. The local coffee shop had his order ready before he entered. He didn't smile, didn't thank them, just nodded once. That was enough. Respect didn't need words. Especially not between men who'd learned it the hard way. Once, at the VFW, a man approached him, retired Force Recon. Said nothing, just stood beside him at the bar. Bought him a drink, clinked glasses once. That was all. In that moment, two wars collided silently. No need to ask what branch. No need to ask where he'd served. In that room, every man understood. Ryan got another package. Small, plain, no return address. Inside, a medal, sealed trident, carved in cold brass. No note, just the weight. He kept it in his drawer, under his keyboard. On rough days, he held it for a second before logging in. Just to remember what mattered. Just to remember that someone once noticed. Walter drove through town once a week. Same route. Past the courthouse, past the benches. He didn't stop, just looked. Made sure the world was still turning, still watching. He knew his time was closing. But while he had breath, he'd keep eyes open for the ones who came after. The forgotten, the quiet, the ones still waiting. Because one day another man will be cuffed for no reason. Another warrior mistaken for nothing. And maybe, just maybe, someone will speak up before it's too late. He never liked photos. Cameras made him uneasy, like they might see too much. In every group picture from his unit, Walter stood in the back, half-shadowed. The men beside him never questioned it. Real warriors don't chase the spotlight, they survive it. Whatever he carried, it wasn't for display. It was deeper, older, worn into his bones like frostbite. Briggs didn't tell stories, not the real ones. Not about what happened in Somalia when the mission went dark and they lost radio contact for 42 hours. Not about Bosnia. Not about the valley in Anaconda where the wind carried voices that weren't supposed to be there. Classified meant something to Walter. Not red tape. not protocol. It meant loyalty. There were no plaques on his walls, no awards on the mantle, because there was no mantle, no framed newspaper clippings or flag in a box. What he kept were simpler things: an oilcloth bundle of worn maps, a broken watch that once belonged to his spotter, a spent casing from a rifle he'd never name. These were his medals, and they never collected dust. His cabin was filled with relics nobody could place. A piece of desert rock embedded in a wooden cross, a Soviet compass with blood still inside the hinge, a folded patch from a uniform with no flag on it. Each item had a story, but the story stayed silent. Walter didn't forget. He just didn't share. Some oaths were permanent. Once a year, a man in uniform showed up unannounced. Always a different man, always Navy. He never knocked. Just waited on the porch until Walter opened the door. No words, just a nod, a sealed envelope, and a brief exchange of eyes that said, "Yes, I remember too." Then they left. It was never explained, and Walter never asked. Inside those envelopes were names, coordinates, occasionally a date. Walter didn't act on them. They weren't missions anymore, just echoes, reminders of who hadn't come back. Reminders that someone, somewhere, still remembered who he'd been. And that mattered, because even ghosts like Walter needed proof they were real once. In town, people still avoided him, not out of fear, out of misunderstanding. He wasn't angry. He wasn't drunk. He just WASN single quotes T. reachable. They saw a man who didn't want to be known. But the truth was, he'd already been known too deeply by brothers who died with his name in their mouths. After that, who else mattered? There were men in D.C. who knew who Walter was, not many. A handful. A certain colonel who kept a file labeled Briggs, oui, in a drawer marked obsolete assets. Not out of disrespect, but because men like Walter didn't belong to the system anymore. They weren't soldiers. They were shadows, untouchable, unrepeatable, and sometimes inconvenient. That file had been pulled once 5 years before the courtroom incident. Someone had tried to connect Walter to a black site operation that had gone sideways in northern Pakistan. The inquiry was shut down in less than an hour. No one spoke of it again. Because if you pull too hard on certain threads, everything unravels. Walter wasn't paranoid. He wasn't hiding. He just knew the cost of being visible. Men like him didn't retire into memoirs and lecture tours. They retired into silence. And when silence wasn't enough, they buried themselves in routine woodwork radio repair. Odd jobs for men who never asked for receipts. A life of measured steps, of controlled breath, of waiting. That's why the arrest had shaken him. Not the cuffs, not the cell, but the exposure. He'd spent years erasing his trail, scrubbing the internet, refusing even a credit card. And now, in one afternoon, his name had been spoken aloud in a courtroom, written into a docket, stamped into a database. It wasn't fear. It was violation. In the days after the court, Walter kept to himself. The general's visit hadn't changed him, not on the surface. He still drove the same route to town, still drank black coffee with no sugar, still mended boots for the amputee 2 miles down the road. But something had shifted behind his eyes. Not broken dash, just ... Loosened. Because for the first time in decades, someone had said his name. Not just the rank, not just the defendant, his name. And not in anger, not in a file, but in recognition. Walter Briggs. SEAL sniper, brother. That mattered more than anything medals could carry. Recognition wasn't about ego. It was about being seen. The VA had called, left a message. Something about his benefits being reinstated. He didn't return the call. Not out of spite, just instinct. He wasn't ready to rejoin the world. Not yet. Not fully, but the line was open now. A crack in the door that hadn't existed before. And part of him wondered what that meant. Late one night, he pulled out an old footlocker from beneath the floorboards, unlatched it. Inside was a single item of folded American flag, scorched at one edge. It had been in his pack during Operation Gothic Serpent. He pulled it from the rubble of a downed chopper, never reported it, never gave it back. Some things were too sacred for bureaucracy. He unfolded it carefully, ran his fingers over the stitching. Then, without knowing why, he lit a candle, sat down and stared at it for an hour. No tears, no words, just presence. Like visiting an old friend's grave. That flag had more blood on it than any cloth should, but it was his, and he wasn't ready to bury it yet. The next day, Walter cleaned his rifle. Not because he planned to use it, just because it was part of who he was. The way some men polish boots or shave at dawn. It wasn't nostalgia. It was maintenance. Identity needs upkeep too, especially when the world tries to erase the parts that don't fit polite narratives. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up outside. No plates, no sound. Walter saw it coming long before it reached his driveway. He didn't panic, just stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed. A man stepped out, tall, civilian clothes, but military posture. "Mind if I talk a minute?" he asked. Walter said nothing, just nodded once. The man introduced himself as Ryan, former JSOC, said he was working on a private vet-to-vet outreach initiative. Not government, not press. Just trying to connect old ghosts to younger ones who needed guidance. Walter listened. He didn't agree, didn't decline, just listened. And when Ryan offered him a card, Walter took it. A small act. But big? They sat on the porch for 15 minutes. No names. No details. Just coffee and silence. And at one point, Ryan looked over and said, "I've read about you, but they didn't write it right." Walter cracked a half smile. "Good," Ryan nodded. "Still, men like you shouldn't fade." Walter stared ahead. "That's the point." And they let the wind answer. After Ryan left, Walter stood at the tree line and watched the sun burn down through the pines. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel redeemed. But something in his chest felt lighter, like one knot had come undone. Not all of them. Just one. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something he hadn't dared hope for in years. 2 weeks passed before Walter picked up the phone. No numbers saved. No caller ID, but he dialed the number on the back of that card. One ring, then another. Then, "This is Ryan." No preamble, no code words. Walter just said, "I've got some things someone should hear. Not from me, for the ones who didn't get home." That was enough. Ryan drove up the next morning. No clipboard, no laptop. Just a legal pad and 2 thermoses of coffee. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Walter started talking, not in a rush, not in confession, just detail by detail, like patching holes in an old boat. He didn't tell stories. He told truths. And Ryan wrote every word. He spoke of a boy named Hayes 19, never saw snow, but took 2 rounds to save a squad of Marines in a firefight outside Kandahar. He spoke of Mendez, the teen's breacher, who could wire a door in his sleep and once carried a dying Afghan child 5 miles without rest. These weren't war stories. They were memories, sacred and sharp. He didn't glorify war, didn't talk politics. Just men who'd sweat and bled and joked and mourned together in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. They didn't die heroic, Walter said. They died tired. They died far away. And most of all, they died believing the guy next to them was worth it. That's what he needed remembered. Ryan never interrupted. Never asked why these stories hadn't been declassified. He understood. Some truths never needed clearance, only trust. And by the time the second thermos was empty, they'd filled 20 pages. Not a transcript. A ledger. A roll call for the forgotten. The kind of thing that doesn't go in the books, but maybe should. Over the next month, they met every Saturday, rain or shine. Walter never repeated himself. Each week, a new name, a new place, a new piece of the puzzle. No timeline, no order, just echoes, stitched together with the kind of reverence only a brother can carry. There was no agenda, no therapy. Just the quiet discipline of remembering. One Saturday, Walter handed Ryan a thumb drive. "There's audio on here," he said. "Not mine. Field reports. Helmet cams. Stuff that shouldn't exist." Ryan didn't ask how he got it. Just nodded and slipped it into his pocket. Trust wasn't earned anymore, it was assumed. Because men like them didn't waste time on fences once the gate was open. Ryan took the stories to a group of veterans in the city. Young guys, rough around the edges, some still drinking too hard, others stuck in the shadow of war. He played clips, read names, described moments. Not once did he say Walter's name, but every man in that room straightened up, because somehow they felt the truth in it. One of them, a younger ranger named Knox, said afterward, "Whoever said those words, I believe him. I want to meet him." Ryan just shook his head. "You don't meet ghosts," he said. "You carry them." That silence that followed said more than any speech could. Walter's legacy was already moving again, without him needing to step forward. Back at the cabin, Walter kept his routine, fixed radios, chopped wood, read books with torn spines. But on his workbench, next to the oilcloth bundle and broken watch, he added something new, a leather-bound notebook. Inside were no names, just reflections. One page read, "Not all truth belongs to history. Some of it belongs to men." The sheriff from town stopped by one evening. Brought a bottle of rye and 2 glasses. No badge on his chest this time. "Heard you're helping some of the younger boys," he said. Walter didn't nod. Didn't deny it either. The sheriff poured a drink. "That's good. They need someone who's walked through hell and didn't come back empty." Walter said nothing, just raised his glass. In that moment, 2 generations of scars clinked together, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that only men who felt violence breathed down their necks could share. There was no brotherhood like it, not in blood, not in sport, only in survival. That night, Walter had a dream he hadn't had in years. Not a battle, not a gunfire, just a long hallway filled with boots lined side by side, every pair polished and still. And at the end of the hall, a door slightly open, light leaking out. He didn't go through it, just stood there, listening to the silence. It felt peaceful. Morning came with a crisp wind. Walter stood outside, watching the trees bend with the breeze. He thought about Ryan, about the young vets, about what it meant to matter after the uniform came off. He didn't crave recognition, but he no longer feared memory. And maybe that was the difference between ghosts and men. They chose whether to haunt or heal. Ryan sent word that one of the young men had checked into a rehab program. Another had started a small mechanic shop. Another had begun writing letters to families of his fallen teammates, something Walter had once done. 2, long ago, when he still believed closure was possible. Hearing this, Walter didn't smile, but his eyes softened. He drove into town that afternoon, not for groceries, just to sit. He found a bench across from the courthouse, the same courthouse where they'd once put cuffs on him. He sat there, cap pulled low, watching the doors open and close, like a breath. And for once, he didn't feel hunted, just present. A man approached, clean cut, tattoos along the arms, military bearing. He sat beside Walter without asking. After a long pause, he said, "You're the one they talked about, aren't you?" Walter didn't answer. The man nodded anyway. "Thanks," he said. "For what?" Walter asked. The man shrugged. "For not disappearing." And then he walked away. Walter sat a while longer, then stood up, joints aching but steady. He didn't need to be seen, but he no longer minded it. Being visible wasn't a threat anymore, it was a choice. And for the first time in decades, he was choosing to exist, not just survive. To be part of the brotherhood again, even if from the fringe. That night, he called Ryan. "Tell them they can write my name," he said. "Not the ops, not the dates, but the stories. The men, let them live." Ryan's voice cracked when he replied, "Roger that." And with that, the last lock on Walter's silence finally gave way. He wasn't giving up his pass. He was giving it purpose. The town fair came once a year. Cheap rides, greasy food, and flags flapping from every pole. Walter didn't care for crowds, but he came anyway. Not for funnel cake or music, but because a local vet named Danny had asked him to attend the service booth for retired servicemen. 1 hour, sit still, answer questions. He agreed. The folding table was rickety, set beside the fire truck display. Walter wore his jacket, zipped high, cap pulled low. On the table, laminated photos from Iraq, unit patches, a battered case filled with medals he'd never claimed. Danny brought them. "Just put him out," he said. "People like seeing him." Walter said nothing, but left the case open. Kids wandered past, parents paused. A few older men nodded, recognizing insignia. One asked about a long-retired field radio. Walter explained its range, where it worked, where it didn't. He rarely said much, but when he did, the words were weighted, not wasteful. For most, he was just an old guy with sharp eyes and a posture that didn't slouch, not even seated. Then came the parking officer, young, nervous power in his step, clipboard in hand. He paused near the booth, squinting. "This your vehicle?" he asked, pointing to the dusty truck behind the event tents. "Yeah," Walter replied. "You can't park there, sir. This area is for staff." Walter glanced at Danny, who had secured the permit earlier. Danny wasn't there now. Walter explained, brief, calm. "I'm part of the veteran outreach booth. Temporary detail." The officer frowned. "No placard. No sticker." Walter gestured toward the windshield. "Dash permit, behind the inspection tag." The officer didn't look. He just began writing. "Not optional, sir. Policy's policy." Walter didn't rise, didn't argue, but his voice grew cold. "You're making a mistake." "Step back," the officer said. "You're being aggressive." Walter hadn't moved, but the officer's hand twitched toward the radio. Walter saw it. Every old reflex lit up inside him. Not from anger, from memory. Men with radios didn't ask questions. They called him backup. That's how it had started the last time. Walter took a deep breath, steadying himself. Danny returned, badge on his belt, face tight. "What's the issue?" The officer didn't flinch. "Improperly parked vehicle, sir. Refused to move it. Possible verbal threat." Danny laughed once, short. "He didn't threaten you. He's here under my authority." The officer frowned. "Still no sticker." Danny sighed. "You giving a ticket to a guy with a Navy Cross?" The officer blinked. "I don't care what medal he has," the officer said flatly. "The rules apply to everyone." Danny stepped forward, whispering low. "You don't know who you're talking to. That man's done things you'll never read about." The officer didn't respond. Just tore the slip off the pad and dropped it on the booth table. "If he wants to appeal, tell him." The ticket landed beside the metal case. A gust of wind lifted the edge of the Navy Cross ribbon. Walter didn't react. He just picked up the slip, read it once, and folded it in half. Danny looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Chief. That shouldn't have happened." Walter shook his head slowly. "You don't owe me anything. I chose to be here." He stayed another hour, spoke to a young boy about camouflage netting, helped a father identify a long-retired mortar part. Then he stood, folded his chair, and walked toward the truck. On the way, he dropped the folded ticket into a trash barrel without slowing. No anger, no complaint. Just discarded it like a flyer he didn't need to carry. That night, Danny sat on his porch, 2 beers sweating between them. "I'm going to file a complaint," Danny said. "That punk shouldn't be in uniform," Walter sipped. "Don't waste the ink." Danny shook his head. "You don't care, do you?" Walter looked up. Caring never changed anything, but knowing who you are, that's enough. Danny didn't argue, just nodded. The next day, Walter visited the VFW. For the first time in years, he didn't drink. He didn't socialize. He just pinned the citation for the parking violation on the board under community notices. Beneath it, He wrote in thick black marker, "Some medals are earned, some tickets are given." Both fade. Only character stays. Then he walked out, silent. The story spread quietly. No headlines. No press, but veterans talk. Word moved through firehouses, mechanic shops, barbers. Not about the ticket, about the way he handled it. No drama, no fury, just unshaken stillness. Some younger men mocked it. Should have cussed him out? Older ones understood better. They'd seen what dignity looked like, and what silence often held back. The officer who issued the ticket never rescinded it. He didn't apologize. But a week later, he stopped showing up at the fare booth. A different man took the role. Older, reservist, quiet. When someone asked if it was punishment, he replied, "No, rotation." But everyone understood. Not a punishment, just a shift. The kind of shift men earn without asking. Danny kept the medal case. Sighed Walter didn't need it anymore. "Your reputation walks ahead of you now," he said. Walter shrugged. "I never walked for them." But he didn't object when Danny framed the Navy Cross and hung it behind the VFW counter. No label, no name, just a medal centered between two worn dog tags and a small folded flag. One night, a city councilman stopped by the VFW young, dressed sharp. Said he wanted to create a plaque honoring veterans who contributed to the community. Danny shook his head. "Walter won't accept it." The councilman asked why. Danny said, "Because Walter Briggs isn't a man who wants to be thanked. He just doesn't want to be forgotten." The councilman paused. He returned a week later with a better idea. "What if we don't name it after him?" he asked. "What if we just make a bench? Quiet spot, no spotlight. Just a place people can sit. Maybe wonder who it's for." Danny smiled. "That's closer." Walter, when asked, simply said, "Do what you want. Just don't call it mine." 2 months later, a small concrete bench appeared near the town lake. No plaque, no sign. Just engraved in the backrest were 4 words, "For the ones who stayed." Nobody explained it. Nobody needed to. Veterans sat there often. Young guys, too. Some alone, some in pairs. Occasionally, Walter passed by. He never stopped, never sat. But he always looked once. One morning, Danny found a folded parking ticket tucked between the bench slats. Same issue code, same violation. On the back, someone had written, "I didn't throw this away. I kept it." No name, just that. Danny chuckled, tore it in half, and let the wind carry it into the lake. Walter didn't ask about it. He didn't have to. Years later, a young recruit preparing to ship out visited the bench. His grandfather had served with Walter. Told him, "Go sit there before you leave. Don't talk. Just sit." The kid did. Felt nothing magical. But something settled in him, low and quiet, like stone in a river. He stood, nodded once to no one, and walked away stronger. Walter never told that story, never asked about the bench. But he kept a picture of it folded in his wallet, creased from years. Beside it, a card from a local hardware store. From a clerk who once kicked him off the curb and later apologized. The note on the back read, "I was wrong. You deserve better. Thank you." One afternoon, Danny found Walter tightening a loose board on the dock. No requests, just doing it. "Still fixing things?" Danny said. Walter grinned. "Things still break." They sat a while. Didn't say much, just watched the water. Danny finally asked, "You ever think about that ticket?" Walter paused. "Sometimes, but not for the reason you think." Danny waited. Walter continued, "It reminded me how fragile respect is. How quick people forget what they don't see. That's not on them. That's just life. But it also reminded me how one moment can either confirm who you are or contradict it." He stood, brushed off his hands. "That officer showed who he was. So did I." Danny nodded once. In the following weeks, a new recruit class at the academy received an unexpected guest speaker. Walter stood in front of them. No notes, no slides. Just stories. Not of glory, of weight. You're gonna see men who don't talk much. Doesn't mean they don't know things. Watch how they carry themselves. Then ask yourself, what kind of man do you want to be? He left the cadets with one final sentence. Respect isn't given by rank. It's given by presence. Show up like it matters, or don't show up at all. Then he walked out. No handshake. No salute. Just gone. But every man in that room stood a little straighter afterward. Some of them didn't even know why. But they felt it. And in the years that followed, every time one of those cadets passed a quiet man on a park bench or a weathered truck in a no-parking zone, they looked twice. Because they learned from someone who never shouted, never demanded. They'd learned that sometimes, even when the world hands you a ticket, you respond by folding it in half. Not with defiance, but with calm, with clarity. With the quiet confidence of someone who's already faced worse and kept walking. That's what Walter taught them, not through speeches, but by example, by silence, by being unshaken when the world tried to provoke him. He didn't rise to it. He just rose above it. That's how legends are made. And when the day finally came when Walter Briggs didn't show up to the lake anymore, no one made a big announcement. They just added one more thing to the bench. A worn ball cap, neatly folded, tied to the side. It stayed there through rain, wind, and sun. No one touched it. Because some memorials don't need brass plaques. They just need memory and honor and the quiet weight of a man who never asked for recognition, but earned it every step of the way. And if you ever see a ticket folded in half and tucked under a windshield, maybe you'll know it's not trash. It's a reminder. Some men don't shout their worth. They just live it. They never found a birth certificate for Walter Briggs. No school records, no enlistment photo. Nothing. The system had a file, but it was redacted in the shadow. Half the pages were missing. The other half were coded beyond civilian clearance. It was as if he'd appeared from nowhere, served in silence, then vanished again. That's exactly how he wanted it. At Fort Raven Intelligence Annex, a retired Army analyst named Burke sat in his windowless office thumbing through fragments of a declassified sealed dossier. The file had been flagged by a Pentagon contact after Walter's courtroom incident. Ghost, Burke muttered. That's what they called operatives like him, men whose records existed only in whispers, held together by reputation. Burke had seen hundreds of files, but this one felt personal. He recognized a pattern of missions set from the early 80s that only a few units touched. Jungle recon, zero extraction. This guy was dropped in and forgotten on purpose, Burke whispered. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It's Burke. We need to talk about Kodiak 6. Halfway across the country, Walter stood alone in his workshop, staring at a faded map. Red pushpins marked places the news never mentioned: Somalia, Mindanao, eastern Serbia. He wasn't reminiscing. He was checking for loose ends. Silence had always been his shield, but now that someone had breached it, he wasn't sure what would follow. He pulled a small wooden box from a hidden panel in the wall. Inside were three objects: a trident patch, a rusted watch, and a crumpled photo of 5 men smiling beside a rotor-blown cliff. One of them wore glasses. Walter stared at the man with glasses the longest. "Still watching my back, huh?" he muttered, before slipping the box back and sealing the wall. Burke's call was routed through 4 encrypted channels before landing on a secure satellite line. A voice answered, "Go." Burke spoke quietly. "Kodiak 6 is active. Confirmed visual in state custody. No alias match, but tattoo and posture confirm ID." The voice paused. "I thought he was dead," Burke exhaled. "Didn't we all?" Then came the chilling reply, "If he surfaced, the others might too." Back in town, Walter's arrest had triggered subtle ripples. An ex-Green Beret named Harlan, who ran a scrap yard 3 miles south of Briggs's cabin, heard the story from a city mechanic. "They cuffed too?" he asked, Weldon torch still sparking. The moment he heard Walter's name, he turned off the torch and walked outside, staring into the hills like they might answer. Harlan wasn't emotional. He didn't believe in chance or justice. just loyalty. He bled beside Walter in a dry river basin south of Mosul. If Walter had resurfaced, something was wrong. That night, he pulled a dusty radio from a metal box in the corner of his trailer and spoke 4 words. Ghost back. Sound off? At 1:13 a.m., a reply crackled through the static. Echo here. Then another, snake bite awake. By sunrise, 5 men across 4 states had replied. None asked questions. None used names. These were not friends. They were shadows from the same past, all stitched together by one man's silent return. Meanwhile, at the county records office, Allen, the clerk who spotted Walter's tattoo, filed a formal request to have the arrest sealed. He knew red tape would block it, but he did it anyway. Sometimes action matters more than outcome. He copied the footage from the courtroom camera onto a flash drive and tucked it in his sock drawer, unsure why. Just a hunch. At the Pentagon, a committee convened quietly in room 4B. Not officially, not on record. Just 5 men in suits and 2 in uniform sitting beneath fluorescent lights reviewing a screen. Walter Briggs' face appeared. One man tapped his pen. If he's visible now, someone flushed him out. That means exposure. That means risk. Another replied. He didn't expose himself. That courtroom did. Walter, meanwhile, sat beneath the lone tree near his cabin, sipping black coffee from an old canteen. He wasn't hiding anymore, not exactly. But he wasn't open either. Just still. Motionless like snipers get when waiting for the wind. The kind of stillness bore not a peace, but patience. He knew the past had heard his name again, and it might come knocking. Burke opened an encrypted storage drive and reviewed black and white footage from an op labeled Sundown Harvest. Grainy silhouettes moved through jungle brush, none visible long enough to identify. But one frame froze him. A man with a sniper rifle, one hand raised in signal. That's him, Burke whispered. No doubt. He flagged the frame, encrypted it again, and filed it under Reactivate Tier 7. 2,000 miles away, Harlan stepped into his barn and uncovered a tarp. Beneath it, a crate sealed with wax and oath. He cracked it open, revealing a combat knife, a half-torn map, and a dog tag with no name, just a call sign. Rook! He placed it around his neck, then loaded 3 magazines into a cloth satchel. Just in case, he muttered. By the next morning, Walter's story had reached the VA hospital in Red Pines, where a retired Marine field medic named Doss sat sharpening tools. Someone had printed out the courtroom transcript and left it on his bench. He didn't ask who. Didn't need to. When he read Walter's name, he simply nodded once, folded the transcript, and placed it in his locker. Somewhere in Utah, a man named Vic sat inside a mountain fire watch tower. He had a full beard, a prosthetic leg, and a scar across his throat that kept him silent. When his radio pinged with the word ghost, he stood, stared out at the horizon, and whispered the only words he'd spoken aloud in 3 years. Briggs is back. None of these men had civilian ties. They weren't members of clubs, didn't join veteran groups, didn't march in parades. They were the quiet ones, the kind that disappear after wars because their stories were never meant to be told. But every one of them moved the moment Briggs resurfaced. Because some debts don't expire. Back at the Pentagon, the committee reviewed Walter's file again. Do we consider him a threat? Someone asked. A colonel responded calmly, only if you mistake silence for weakness. Another added, he served his country in ways we'll never admit. The fact he's still breathing means he chose to survive. Let's not force him to choose otherwise. They voted to leave him alone for now. Walter walked into town that afternoon. No truck, no purpose, just walking. The sheriff passed him on Main Street and gave a polite nod. Walter nodded back. It wasn't fear, wasn't respect exactly. It was awareness. A man who'd seen a ghost and chose to pretend he hadn't. Walter kept walking, disappearing into the tree line like fog in the morning. That night, a black SUV parked near the woods. A man in a dark jacket stepped out and placed a sealed envelope beneath a rock on Walter's porch. Inside was a photograph. 5 men from that rotor-blown cliff. On the back, scribbled in pencil, "Still got your 6." Walter stared at it for a long time, then folded it and burned it. The next morning, Harlan knocked on Walter's door without a word. Just stood there, holding 2 coffees. Walter opened the door, took one, and nodded. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. Harlan sat on the porch. Walter followed. They watched the trees shift with the wind. 2 ghosts, sharing silence like a war story, neither wanted to tell. Back at the scrapyard, Harlan's apprentice found the old radio blinking. He didn't know what it meant, but he scribbled down the last message. Eyes open, Rook moving. He'd heard stories about Rook, a sniper, a myth, a name whispered by men who bled in deserts and jungles. He looked toward the hills and said quietly, "They're not done yet." Walter stood at his workbench that night and opened a crate he hadn't touched in 15 years. Inside, an M40 rifle, perfectly clean, sights aligned. He didn't pick it up, just looked at it, remembered who he was, who he still might be. He closed the lid, locked it, then walked outside and watched the stars like he used to on long deployments. Somewhere deep in a DC archive, a note was added to Walter's redacted file. Subject reactivated through no fault of his own. Monitor quietly, no interference. Beneath it, a second line was added by hand. If he moves, let him. And in the margins, someone had drawn a symbol of trident wrapped in thorns. A ghost mark, silent, unbroken. Walter Briggs didn't want to be remembered. Didn't want a parade, a monument, or a medal. He wanted peace. But the past doesn't ask permission. It returns when it wants, wearing old boots and whispering old names. And when it does, the men who served don't run. They don't hide. They stand together in silence. Even ghosts answer when called. He sat quietly in the back row. Same bench, same posture. Nothing in his hands, no expression on his face. The bailiff didn't recognize him. The clerk barely glanced. The courtroom buzzed with noise and routine. No one noticed the man with the steel gray hair and the sealed trident tattoo under his cuff. Not yet. Case after case cycled through. Drunken fights, unpaid tickets, petty theft. The judge moved like clockwork, impatient, robotic. Prosecutors rattled off charges. Public defenders mumbled pleas. No one looked up, except him. He watched each man walk in, watched their hands, their posture, their eyes. Some defiant, some broken, all waiting for the same machine to roll them under. He wasn't here for redemption or spectacle. No more generals, no challenge coins, no quiet nods from Pentagon aides. This time he'd come alone, no name on a docket, no uniform to announce his pass. He wasn't here for himself. He was watching, listening, waiting for someone who looked like he once did, forgotten, quiet, dangerous only because the world had forgotten what forged him. Mid-morning, they brought in a young man, hands cuffed, hoodie soaked from the rain. He wouldn't make eye contact with the judge, didn't give a name. The bailiff rolled his eyes. The prosecutor cracked a joke under his breath. Only the man in the back bench sat forward slightly. Something about the kid's posture didn't fit the file. The judge sighed. Refusing to identify? Fine. Remand to holding. The clerk reached for her stamp, but the man stood. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just deliberate. One step forward. One phrase spoken clearly. Request to address the court. Everyone turned. The judge squinted. Who are you? He stepped into the aisle. Retired Chief Walter Briggs. Navy SEAL. Formerly attached SEAL Team 2. I believe this young man is my responsibility. The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The judge leaned back, suddenly unsure. The prosecutor stared like he'd seen a ghost. The bailiff stepped forward, but then stopped, unsure what protocol to follow. Walter reached into his coat, slowly, and produced an envelope. Affidavit of recognition, filed yesterday. Check your records. The clerk retrieved it, eyebrows rising. It's legitimate, pre-certified, filed under Emergency Intervention Clause. Article 6B. The judge looked at Walter. You filed this before he was even arraigned. Walter nodded. Because I knew he'd end up here. They always do. I met him last week. He reminds me of someone? Who? The judge asked. Walter paused. Me. The young man turned slowly. His face hardened, unsure whether to trust the gesture. Walter took another step forward. Your Honor, request dismissal of charge and temporary custody released to veteran support supervision. The judge looked to the prosecutor, who suddenly had nothing clever to say. He just nodded, unsure what else to do. Granted, the judge said. Charges dropped. Custody transferred. The gavel fell. Walter didn't put a hand on the kid. He just nodded toward the doors. Come on. The boy hesitated, then followed. Not fast. Not grateful. Just quiet. They left the courthouse in silence. No applause. No handshakes. Just two men who had seen War I literal, one still learning where his was coming from. They got coffee down the street. Sat in a booth by the window. Walter didn't ask questions. The kid didn't offer answers. Eventually, he spoke. You really a SEAL? Walter stirred his coffee. Once. The boy nodded. I thought you were just some old dude watching court. Walter smiled faintly. I was. Days passed. They worked in the garage. Old tools. Bent nails. Broken things. Walter showed him how to repair, not replace. How to steady his hands. How to slow his breathing. The boy didn't ask for his story, but he listened. Every silence taught him more than a lecture ever could. Men like Walter taught by example. Word got around again. This time not with medals or courtrooms, just whispers. The guy who showed up when it mattered. The one who didn't talk much, but fixed what others threw away. More boys came by. Some wore ankle monitors. Some still had bruises from bar fights. None of them were beyond saving. Walter never acted like a savior. He just handed them a wrench. Told them what not to do. When they messed up, he didn't yell. He watched, waited, and showed them again, like someone once had for him. When men showed up broken, he didn't ask where they came from, just whether they wanted to learn. One evening, the boy Eli asked, Why'd you help me? Walter didn't look up, because someone helped me once. Court didn't, cops didn't. Some men just know what broken looks like. Eli didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, I don't want to end up like I was. Walter nodded. Then don't. Simple. Not easy. But simple. Spring rolled in quiet and slow. The shop filled with noise-scraping metal, laughing boys, silence between them. Eli stayed. Slept in the shed out back. Ate what Walter cooked. Fixed what he broke. He still had trouble sleeping. Still flinched sometimes when people raised their voice. But he stood straighter now. Looked people in the eye. They never spoke of the courtroom again. It didn't matter. That place hadn't saved him. A man had. Not with a speech or a sermon, but with presence, with patience. Walter didn't need to explain his choices. He just needed someone to walk beside him, even for a little while. And now he was doing the same. One day, a letter came. Official, government sealed. Walter read it quietly, then folded it, placed it in the fire without a word. Eli asked later what it said. Walter shrugged. Some people still trying to figure out what to do with me. Eli chuckled. What did you tell them? Walter smirked. Nothing. Let them wonder. That night, they sat on the porch. Rain falling steady on the tin roof. Eli said, You think I'll ever be like you? Walter shook his head. No, and you shouldn't try. Be like you. Just make sure you can stand the man in the mirror. Eli looked out into the dark. I think I can. One of the boys asked once, You ever wish they saluted when you left? Walter leaned against the wall, thought for a long moment. No. If they did, I wouldn't have learned what mattered. He looked around the shop. Metals tarnish, salutes fade. But how a man lives after how he helps the next, that's what counts. Word of Walter spread further than he knew. A few old brothers came by. Corpsemen, snipers, a ranger once who just stood outside and nodded before leaving. They didn't need to say much. Walter saw it in their eyes. They remembered him, still did. And in some quiet way, he'd become what the world forgot to protect. He wasn't famous. He wasn't loud. But in the lives of a few young men trying not to fall apart, he'd become something stronger than legend. He'd become real, a constant. A man who didn't need to be seen to matter, who walked through fire once and came back not with vengeance, but with tools. In the shop, there was an old plaque nailed above the workbench. No name, just an etching of a trident and 5 words. Fix what others throw away. No one asked who put it there. No one needed to. It wasn't about history. It was about today. About boys becoming men the hard way, but the right way. The last paragraph in Eli's probation file read, "Subject exhibits unusually high respect for authority figures known only as Walter. Emotional growth significant. No further recommendations." Walter read it once, smiled faintly, and shredded the page. Eli asked why. Walter said, "I'm not your file." "And you're not theirs." They never spoke of it again. Years later, Walter's chair sat empty on a quiet morning. Tools untouched, coffee still warm. Eli found the envelope on the workbench with just his name and a folded note. No explanation. Just this: if they forget me again, remind them we're still here. Not for medals. For each other, below it, a coin. Same as before? Eli didn't cry. Not then. He just put the note in his pocket and opened the shop like normal. Boys came by. New ones. Rough around the edges. He handed them a wrench. Taught them to sand edges, fix broken radios, steady their hands. He didn't talk about Walter unless they asked. And even then, only a little. Because the story wasn't meant to be shouted. It was meant to be passed quietly, man to man, like a spark carried forward. Walter Briggs never needed a statue. He just needed to know that the next one wouldn't fall through the cracks. Eli made sure of that, every single day, without noise, without reward. Just like him. The courtroom never honored him. The system never did either. But the silence that followed every time his name came up, men understood. Real ones, the kind who don't speak unless it matters. The kind who've carried weight so long it becomes part of their spine. And when they remember a man like Walter, they stand. Not because of orders, but because of what he carried and how he carried it. Not for glory, not for pride, but because some men were never saluted when they left. And still, they gave everything. So the least we can do is remember, quietly, steadily, and if needed, fix what others throw away. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, share, and leave a name in the comments. Someone who never asked to be remembered, but deserves to be. Because some men don't need parades. They just need to be seen once and never forgotten again. He sat in the corner of the room like a statue no one remembered building. Sergeant Mike Harlan. 28 years in uniform. Combat tours in Fallujah, Helmand, and Mogadishu. Now, a courthouse bailiff in a sleepy town that forgot how to salute. But he never stopped watching, because once you learn to scan for threats, you never unlearn. He wasn't supposed to care. That's what he told himself. The job now was keys and cuffs, escorting drunks and petty thieves to the front table and back out again. But that morning, when the old man was dragged in silent, cuffed, bruised, something about him struck different. Harlan felt it deep. This wasn't routine. This was wrong. The old man never looked up. Sat like stone, wrists tight behind his back, shirt torn at the collar. The young cops who brought him in leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smug. Harlan had seen their type in every war cocky until the first shot rang. He watched him now and felt his fist curl slowly. He noticed the ink first, faded blue beneath the frayed sleeve. Not a biker tat, not prison ink. A trident, old-school style, framed in worn lines that only meant one thing to the men who knew. Harlan knew. He'd seen that mark before on men who never spoke of what they'd done. He asked the clerk quietly for the arrest report. It was thin, disturbing the peace, refusing to leave private property. No ID, no next of kin. The public defender hadn't even looked at it. The judge hadn't either. Harlan set the file down, but his mind didn't let go. Something wasn't right. He stepped outside, called a friend. A Marine he'd served with, now stationed stateside in an intel unit. Described the tattoo, the man's build, the date of birth guessed by intake. There was a pause. Then a voice on the other end said, "If that's who I think it is, you better not let him be arraigned like this." Inside, the hearing began. The judge asked for a name. The old man gave none. The defender shrugged. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. But Harlan watched the way the man sat upright, but not stiff, calm, but not broken. Like someone who'd learned long ago that silence was safer than explanations. That silence could save. That's when the door opened. He heard the boots before he saw them. Polished leather against worn tile. 2 aides stepped through first. Then came the general. Full dress, 4 stars. Harlan straightened before he even realized he was moving. Instinct. The room went still. No one moved, not even the judge. The old man finally raised his head. The general asked to speak. His voice was gravel and command. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't ask for attention. He gave the old man's name, rank, and record. SEAL Team 2, confirmed operations that still didn't exist on paper. Awards no one had ever pinned on publicly. And one fact that silenced the room. The man had once saved the general's own brother. Harlan watched the young cops pale. Watched their weight shift. Watched the smirk fade like smoke and wind. He didn't say a word. Just stood with arms behind his back, remembering every time someone had called his generation soft. Remembering every time someone forgot who bought their comfort with blood. He knew what came next. The general requested the cuffs be removed. The judge nodded slowly. The bailiff Harlan stepped forward. His hands were steady. He knelt, not in submission, but in respect. The key clicked softly. The old man didn't flinch. He looked at Harlan just for a second, and in that glance, something passed between them. Recognition, not names. Just wait. When the old man stood, he didn't straighten to make a point. He stood because that's what men like him do when they're finally unshackled. He folded his jacket over one arm. The general said something soft about Kandahar, about a Humvee on fire, about a rescue that changed his family forever. The courtroom didn't breathe. Harlan did something he hadn't done in years. He saluted. It wasn't policy. It wasn't required. But it was owed. And in that moment, it felt like the room bowed without moving. Because respect like that echoes. When the general left, he left no orders. Just a message. This man gave everything. Don't you ever forget him again? And he walked out. The old man followed. The doors closed. Silence returned. Harlan gathered the file, walked it to the shredder. Didn't ask. Didn't check with the judge. He fed it through slowly, like burning old orders. Because some stories aren't meant for court records. They're meant for memory. Later, he stood outside. The sun had dropped low. The courthouse was quiet. And Harlan lit a cigarette with a hand that had once held a rifle in the dark. He watched the street where the old man had walked away. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He didn't tell anyone what he saw. He didn't need to. But from that day forward, every time a case came in with a man who looked too quiet, too steady, too tired, he looked twice. Because the next one might not come with a general. The next one might still be waiting. And Sergeant Mike Harlan had decided he wouldn't let a warrior disappear without someone seeing him first. He sat alone on the bench outside the VA back straight, hands clasped. No movement except the wind teasing the hem of his jacket. His discharge file sat unopened beside him, a thick folder that looked full but wasn't. Just a cover page, stamped, unsigned. The rest? Blank, like his service had vanished into smoke. He hadn't asked for much, just a record that said he'd been there, that he'd given his years. Instead, The papers told him nothing. No commendations, no dates, no rank. He stared at them like a stranger reading someone else's story. And maybe that's what he'd become. A man who served but didn't exist on paper. His name was Daniel Rourke, Sergeant, 12th Recon. 2 deployments in Helmand, 1 in Korengal. The last mission classified so deeply, even his commanding officer couldn't talk about it. All they'd ever said was, "You'll be forgotten for their safety." He'd agreed, but he hadn't expected this. No record meant no VA support, no medals, no acknowledgement, not even the flag he'd earned. The clerk behind the counter had glanced at the folder, then at him. "Looks like you never served, sir." Rourke didn't argue. He just walked out, holding the proof of his absence like a wound. The town remembered him barely. A few bartenders still called him Sarge. The mechanic nodded once in a while. But no one asked questions anymore. Not since he came back changed. Not angry, not violent, just quieter. He stopped showing up to meetings. Turned down the VFW invite. Said little, carried more. His discharge had come in the mail, a thin envelope dropped between junk ads and bills. He didn't open it for 2 weeks. When he did, he sat in silence for hours. The house stayed dark. The fridge hummed. Outside, kids played in the street, but inside, something final had cracked. The papers told him nothing. No record of service, no thank you, no signature. Just a vague form number and a bold font word. Discharge, not honorably. Not dishonorably. Just ... finish. As if someone had hit delete on every year that mattered. As if he'd never stood in the mud or the blood. Daniel had never been a loud soldier. Never wrote home. Never posted pictures. His only photos were old Polaroids, boots in dust, silhouettes at sunrise. He never expected fame, but he expected to be counted. Now, he wasn't even a number. Not in the system. Not on the wall. Not anywhere. It started to wear on him, subtly at first. He walked slower, talked less. Spent more time sitting on that bench outside the VA holding that blank discharge like a ghost in his hands. Once, a young private walked past and said, "You look like you've seen things." Daniel didn't respond. Another time, a former corporal asked if he was there during Iron Dagger. Daniel nodded once, then said, "Parts of it." That was all. The younger man didn't press. Some guys know the line between curiosity and intrusion. But most just walked past, never knowing that the man beside them carried battlefields. He didn't hate the system. Not really. He'd known what he signed up for. What burned wasn't the silence, it was the erasure. A man can live without applause. He can even live with nightmares. But being erased, that's something else. That's being told the hell you walked through never existed. The folder never left his truck. He tucked it under the passenger seat, dog-eared, weather-worn. Sometimes he took it out, stared at the blank sheets, then put it back. Like checking a wound that never quite healed. He didn't expect a fix. He just didn't want to forget what he lost. One day, something shifted. A letter arrived. No return address. Just his name, spelled correctly, something that rarely happened. Inside was a single-line handwritten in black ink. "Records are hidden. That doesn't mean you are." There was no signature. Just a folded page beneath it. Coordinates. A date. Nothing else. He thought about ignoring it. Thought it might be a mistake. But something in the handwriting felt familiar, so he went. It led him to a small compound 3 counties over. Guard at the gate didn't ask for ID, just nodded once and said, "They're waiting." Daniel parked. Walked in. No questions. Inside, the air smelled like old canvas and coffee. The walls were lined with plaques unmarked, unframed. A man stood in the back, arms crossed, hair gray at the temples. He turned slowly. "Sergeant Rourke," he said, not as a question. "I'm glad you came." Daniel didn't answer. He waited. The man gestured to a seat. "We lost your papers," he said bluntly. "They scrubbed everything after Black Signal. Too sensitive. Too exposed. The whole team was reassigned. Daniel nodded. He already knew. What he didn't know was what this man wanted now. "Why call me?" he asked. The man slid a file across the table, thicker than the one Daniel carried. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance, maps, op notes, names, his name, his teammates, operations he'd been told never to speak of. "This is yours," the man said. "Off the record. For your eyes. Proof you existed." Daniel's hand shook slightly as he turned the pages. He saw the faces of men he'd thought forgotten. One in particular, the lieutenant who never made it back. They'd never given Daniel the body, just a black bag in silence. Now, in this file, was a note. "Recovered. Buried Arlington." His voice cracked for the first time in years. "No one told me." The man nodded. "No one could. But we kept it, for men like you. For when the silence becomes too much." Daniel closed the file. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not for this, just for remembering." The man stood. "You earned a lot more than you got, Sergeant. But if nothing else, you deserve this." He held out a patch. The old insignia, his unit's original, not regulation, not for display, just cloth and thread. But Daniel took it like it weighed 100 pounds. It did. He left without fanfare, no signatures, no salutes, just a nod. He drove home with the file on his passenger seat, hands steady, eyes forward. He didn't need to show it to anyone. He just needed to know it existed. Sometimes that's all a man needs to know his story didn't vanish. The next morning, Daniel woke before the sun. He brewed coffee, sat on his porch, and watched the sky bleed orange. The file sat beside him, closed but present. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Just having it there changed something. He felt counted, maybe not by the government, but by someone. He returned to the VA that afternoon, same bench, same folder. This time, he held a second envelope. He walked to the front desk. Same clerk. "You again?" she asked. "Yup," Daniel replied. "Try this one." He slid the new documents across the counter. She opened them. Eyes widened slightly. No apology followed. Just a new form, a new application. She typed slowly. Asked for his social. Daniel recited it with the precision of a man who used to memorize enemy coordinates. 5 minutes later, she said, "Okay, you're in the system now." It was simple, but not small. Word spread, quietly, among the old ranks. Men who hadn't spoken to Rourke in years dropped by. One brought firewood. Another, a six-pack in silence. No questions. Just presence. The kind of presence only fellow ghosts understand. One day, someone nailed a new sign on Daniel's porch. It said, "We remember." He didn't return to the VFW, didn't go back to meetings. But he did walk taller. When the local recruiter invited him to speak to new enlistees, he said no, then changed his mind. Showed up in jeans and boots. Held up the patch and said, "Don't serve to be remembered. Serve to remember who you are." A young recruit asked, "But what if we're forgotten?" Daniel paused. "Then remember each other?" That was all. He didn't need applause. Just ears. Just one kid who might carry the story forward. Because some stories can't be written down. Some exist only in scars, silence, and faded patches. Years passed. The file stayed with him. Untouched but never far. When he died, there was no 21-gun salute. No ceremony, just a folded flag on a simple pine box. But inside the casket, tucked beneath his hands, was the old folded blank discharge on top. And beneath it, the one that mattered. They buried him next to the lieutenant, the one who hadn't made it. The one Daniel had carried across 20 clicks of hostile terrain. The one he couldn't save. But now they lay side by side, file beside file. Two names once classified. Now remembered, quietly, permanently. No headlines, no statues, just men. Just stories passed from one whisper to another. That's how memory works for those who never asked to be remembered. It survives in moments, in silence, in a patch worn thin and kept close, in the weight of a folder that should have been blank but wasn't. Daniel Rourke's name isn't on any walls. Not officially, but in a locked cabinet behind a nondescript door at a compound 3 counties over, his file sits intact, labeled, preserved. Every now and then, a young operator opens it, reads the mission logs, and realizes the legacy beneath the silence. There's a quote written on the back page of the file. Faded, handwritten, no attribution. Just words. They'll forget your name, but not your silence. That's what it meant to be him. To serve without audience. To disappear without demand. And still, somehow, leave something behind worth remembering. Back in town, the old mechanic keeps a picture taped above his workbench. 2 men in uniform, blurry, barely visible. No names, just the words. They were here. Below it, a bullet casing mounted in resin. It's from Hellman. No one touches it. They just nod when they see it. That's enough. At the VA, a nurse keeps a folded patch in her drawer. She doesn't know the whole story. Just remembers a quiet man who came in one day and changed the room. She tells new hires, you'll meet men like that. Don't ask for their stories. Just listen when they speak. And when they don't, sit closer. Sometimes silence is the loudest kind of truth. Daniel Rourke lived that way, died that way, and left behind a silence so heavy it filled the spaces where records failed. Where the paperwork said nothing, the man said everything without ever raising his voice. If you ever meet a man with blank discharge papers, don't assume nothing happened. Sometimes the pages are blank because the truth burned too hot to be written. Sometimes silence was the mission. And remembering quietly, honestly, is the only honor they ever wanted in return. That's the legacy Daniel left behind. The wind whipped through the courthouse steps like a rifle crack. Everyone stood still, uncertain why. The old man at the defense table hadn't moved. Neither had the bailiff. But then the back doors opened, and in stepped a young officer, full dress uniform, holding a folded flag in both hands. He didn't speak, just walked. Straight down the center aisle, boots precise, shoulders locked. He passed every reporter, every lawyer, every wide-eyed civilian who didn't understand why a soldier in full honors had just entered a civilian courtroom. The bailiff tried to stop him. The judge started to speak. He didn't pause. The veteran in cuffs Walter Briggs lifted his eyes for the first time that day. 30 years of silence behind him. He stared at the flag, and something in his face shifted. Not tears. Not fear. Just a quiet recognition. The kind only soldiers share. The kind that doesn't need words. The officer stopped in front of the defense table, set the flag down, looked Walter in the eye. "I brought this back, sir," he said quietly, "from Coringal." Then he saluted, not for show, not for the room, for the man, for the years no one saw, for the silence he carried. The judge cleared his throat. "Son, this is a court of law." The lieutenant turned slowly. "Understood, Your Honor, but the law forgot this man long before you brought him here. I'm not here to testify. I'm here to return what was his." He tapped the flag. He carried the weight. "We brought it back." The courtroom froze, everyone watching, but no one moved. No one dared interrupt, because something deeper than law was unfolding, something older, the kind of reverence not found in textbooks. Brotherhood, loss, return. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about remembering what justice had forgotten. Sacrifice without recognition is a wound. The flag had been missing for 12 years. Last seen on the back of a rucksack, Briggs, before a classified op went dark. No recovery, no report. Just radio silence and 2 KAs. One Mia. When Briggs reappeared weeks later, he never spoke of it. Not to command. Not to his brothers. The file was sealed. Mission erased. Briggs retired quietly. Nobody asked questions until now. A petty trespassing charge. A broken fence. A squabble over land. That's what dragged him back into a courtroom. That's what put cuffs on his wrists. And that's when the lieutenant, barely born when the mission happened, showed up. His name was L.T. Kyle Mercer. West Point, 5th Recon, son of a man who didn't come back. His father's name, Captain Ben Mercer, one of the men listed KIA in Briggs' mission. Kyle never knew him. Only knew there was one man left alive who might have. He'd searched for years. Not publicly, quietly, a whisper here, a log there. Until one day, he found a name in a hospital record, a man who limped but never filed injury reports. A man with scars but no medals. A man arrested for sleeping in the park next to a war memorial. When Kyle met him the first time, Briggs didn't speak, just looked at the boy, then at the boots he wore. "Don't salute me," he said flatly. "I didn't finish the mission." Kyle just nodded. He came back the next week. And the week after that. Eventually, Briggs handed him something. A piece of torn canvas. Half a flag. The rest burned in a blast. Kyle took it like it was gold. "Where's the rest?" he asked. Briggs didn't answer, but now, months later, he'd found it. Buried in a duffel marked for disposal. Evidence locker at an old base about to close. Kyle pulled strings, wrote letters, flew cross-country, signed forms under penalty of discharge. Just to hold that flag again, just to bring it back. Because some men lose fathers, others lose silence. But the worst loss is memory, when no one even tries to remember. Kyle refused to let that happen. He'd watched this trial unfold from a distance. Read the charges. Knew they were nonsense. Knew they wouldn't stick. But it wasn't about the verdict. It was about the shame. About seeing a man who once saved lives get booked like a drunk. About seeing honor put in handcuffs, so Kyle made a choice. Dress blues, white gloves, and the flag. Not as protest, as respect. To show a room full of strangers that this wasn't just a man, they were judging a chapter of history. One they'd forgotten. One that never made the news. Because it was never allowed to. The prosecutor tried to object, said it was undue influence. The judge banged his gavel, but even he seemed smaller now, as if the gravity in the room had shifted. The gavel echoed, but no one listened. All eyes were on Briggs, who now held the flag in both hands, shaking. He hadn't touched it since the blast. Hadn't seen it since they pulled Mercer's body from the wreckage. Back then, he tried to carry it. Tried to hold on to something while dragging a man through fire. But in the end, it burned. Half of it, like everything else that day. But now, here it was, whole again. The part he thought lost. And in the hands of the son of the man he couldn't save. Life didn't offer many redemptions, but this moment, this was one. And Briggs, who hadn't cried since '97, blinked hard, then nodded. Just once, that was enough. The judge called a recess. Nobody moved. Kyle sat beside Briggs, not saying much, just presence. That mattered more than any argument. The flag sat between them, not folded anymore. Just there, open. Real. For once, the courtroom didn't feel like a place of judgment. It felt like a place of recognition. Outside, the sky had shifted. Rain coming. But inside, everything felt still. A silence too deep for words. The bailiff eventually escorted Briggs back to holding. Kyle followed. "They're gonna throw it out," he said. Briggs shrugged. "Doesn't matter. They already threw me out years ago." Kyle shook his head. "Not anymore." Later that day, the charges were dropped. Official reason, procedural error. Real reason? They saw what the flag meant. What the man meant. You don't prosecute ghosts when they finally come into view. You let them be, you let them breathe. Sometimes that's the most justice you can give. Briggs walked out without cuffs. Kyle waited at the bottom of the steps. He didn't say much. Just handed him a ride. "You still got a place?" he asked. Briggs nodded toward a trailer on the outskirts. "It ain't much." Kyle smiled. "Neither is a flag. Until someone carries it right." They drove in silence. 2 generations, 1 story. Kyle didn't ask for details. didn't need the play-by-play. He just needed the presence. The man who tried to save his father. Who almost did. Who kept the mission's way in his silence so others could move forward. That mattered more than records. At the trailer, Briggs opened the door, hesitated, turned. "You want to come in?" Kyle looked past him. Bare room, few photos, a box of old gear. He nodded. Yeah. Inside, the place smelled like dust and old coffee. Briggs pulled out a chair. Kyle sat. The flag sat between them again. Briggs finally spoke. "Your dad was the real leader. I was just a point man." Kyle shook his head. "You were the one who came back. That counts." Briggs looked away. "Coming back isn't always winning." Kyle leaned forward. "No, but remembering is. And you remembered for both of you." They stayed up late, talking, sometimes just staring. Old war stories don't need punchlines. They just need ears that won't flinch. Kyle listened like a son. Briggs spoke like a man who'd been waiting years to be heard, but never asked for it. The difference between pity and respect is knowing when to speak. Eventually, Briggs reached under his cot, pulled out a box. Inside photos, patches, a bent dog tag. He handed Kyle a picture. 2 men, muddy, smiling through blood. "That's the last one we took," he said. Right before it hit, Kyle didn't flinch. "I've only seen him in dress blues. Never like this." Briggs nodded. "He liked the dirt, said it made him feel honest." Kyle smiled. He passed that down. That night, they said nothing else. Kyle left at dawn. The flag stayed with Briggs. But now he didn't tuck it away. He mounted it, framed it, put it on the wall beside the door. Weeks passed. Briggs started walking into town again. The diner cook gave him free coffee. The librarian waved. The mechanic asked about a tune-up. Nobody brought up the trial. But they saw the change. The shoulders weren't as heavy, the eyes clearer. The kind of clarity that comes from being seen again. He started going to the VFW on Sundays. Didn't talk much. Just sat. Listened. Sometimes offered a nod. That was enough. One night, a new guy showed up young, quiet. Didn't say his unit. Just stared at the wall. Briggs sat next to him. "Syed, you don't have to tell it. Just don't forget it." The young guy nodded. Passed him a folded paper. Coordinates. Same kind Briggs once received. He recognized the handwriting. Kyle, passing it forward. Another man. Another silence. Another mission to remember. Briggs folded the note, slipped it in his pocket. "I'll go," he said. "If he's like us, someone should be there." He went. And again, always quiet. Always dressed plain. But he brought something each time, a patch, a flag, a story. Not for them, for the ones who came after. Because sometimes the only proof a man has that he mattered is another man showing up. One morning, a letter came. Department of Defense. Inside, updated discharge papers. Fully detailed. Rank, missions, commendations. Even a handwritten note. Your silence served them. "But your story serves us." Briggs stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into the frame behind the flag. Quiet dignity never asks for display. Years later, a young lieutenant visited that same VFW, looked at the photo wall. One picture stood out. 2 men, one old, one young, flag between them, no caption, just a plaque. They remembered. The lieutenant asked the bartender, "Who were they?" The bartender just smiled. "The ones who brought it back." He sat quietly in the back row. Same bench, same posture. Nothing in his hands, no expression on his face. The bailiff didn't recognize him. The clerk barely glanced. The courtroom buzzed with noise and routine. No one noticed the man with the steel gray hair and the sealed trident tattoo under his cuff. Not yet. Case after case cycled through. Drunken fights, unpaid tickets, petty theft. The judge moved like clockwork, impatient, robotic. Prosecutors rattled off charges. Public defenders mumbled pleas. No one looked up, except him. He watched each man walk in, watched their hands, their posture, their eyes. Some defiant, some broken, all waiting for the same machine to roll them under. He wasn't here for redemption or spectacle. No more generals, no challenge coins, no quiet nods from Pentagon aides. This time he'd come alone, no name on a docket, no uniform to announce his pass. He wasn't here for himself. He was watching, listening, waiting for someone who looked like he once did forgotten, quiet, dangerous only because the world had forgotten what forged him. Mid-morning, they brought in a young man, hands cuffed, hoodie soaked from the rain. He wouldn't make eye contact with the judge, didn't give a name. The bailiff rolled his eyes. The prosecutor cracked a joke under his breath. Only the man in the back bench sat forward slightly. Something about the kid's posture didn't fit the file. The judge sighed. Refusing to identify? Fine. Remand to holding. The clerk reached for her stamp, but the man stood. Not loud, not theatrical, just deliberate. One step forward. One phrase spoken clearly. Request to address the court. Everyone turned. The judge squinted. Who are you? He stepped into the aisle. Retired Chief Walter Briggs, Navy SEAL, formerly attached SEAL Team 2. I believe this young man is my responsibility. The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The judge leaned back, suddenly unsure. The prosecutor stared like he'd seen a ghost. The bailiff stepped forward, but then stopped unsure what protocol to follow. Walter reached into his coat, slowly, and produced an envelope. Affidavit of recognition, filed yesterday. Check your records. The clerk retrieved it, eyebrows rising. It's legitimate, pre-certified, filed under Emergency Intervention Clause. Article 6B. The judge looked at Walter. You filed this before he was even arraigned. Walter nodded. Because I knew he'd end up here. They always do. I met him last week. He reminds me of someone? Who? The judge asked. Walter paused. Me. The young man turned slowly. His face hardened, unsure whether to trust the gesture. Walter took another step forward. Your Honor, request dismissal of charge and temporary custody released to Veteran Support Supervision. The judge looked to the prosecutor, who suddenly had nothing clever to say. He just nodded, unsure what else to do. Granted, the judge said. Charges dropped. Custody transferred. The gavel fell. Walter didn't put a hand on the kid. He just nodded toward the doors. Come on. The boy hesitated, then followed. Not fast. Not grateful. Just quiet. They left the courthouse in silence. No applause. No handshakes. Just two men who had seen War I literal, one still learning where his was coming from. They got coffee down the street. Sat in a booth by the window. Walter didn't ask questions. The kid didn't offer answers. Eventually, he spoke. You really a SEAL? Walter stirred his coffee. Once. The boy nodded. I thought you were just some old dude watching court. Walter smiled faintly. I was. Days passed. They worked in the garage. Old tools. Bent nails. Broken things. Walter showed him how to repair, not replace. How to steady his hands. How to slow his breathing. The boy didn't ask for his story, but he listened. Every silence taught him more than a lecture ever could. Men like Walter taught by example. Word got around again. This time not with medals or courtrooms, just whispers. The guy who showed up when it mattered. The one who didn't talk much, but fixed what others threw away. More boys came by. Some wore ankle monitors. Some still had bruises from bar fights. None of them were beyond saving. Walter never acted like a savior. He just handed them a wrench. Told them what not to do. When they messed up, he didn't yell. He watched, waited, and showed them again, like someone once had for him. When men showed up broken, he didn't ask where they came from, just whether they wanted to learn. One evening, the boy Eli asked, Why'd you help me? Walter didn't look up, because someone helped me once. Court didn't. Cops didn't. Some men just know what broken looks like. Eli didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I don't want to end up like I was." Walter nodded. "Then don't. Simple. Not easy. But simple." Spring rolled in quiet and slow. The shop filled with noise-scraping metal, laughing boys, silence between them. Eli stayed. Slept in the shed out back. Ate what Walter cooked. Fixed what he broke. He still had trouble sleeping. Still flinched sometimes when people raised their voice. But he stood straighter now. Looked people in the eye. They never spoke of the courtroom again. It didn't matter. That place hadn't saved him. A man had. Not with a speech or a sermon, but with presence, with patience. Walter didn't need to explain his choices. He just needed someone to walk beside him, even for a little while. And now he was doing the same. One day, a letter came. Official, government sealed. Walter read it quietly, then folded it, placed it in the fire without a word. Eli asked later what it said. Walter shrugged. "Some people still trying to figure out what to do with me." Eli chuckled. "What did you tell them?" Walter smirked. "Nothing. Let them wonder." That night, they sat on the porch. Rain falling steady on the tin roof. Eli said, "You think I'll ever be like you?" Walter shook his head. "No, and you shouldn't try. Be like you. Just make sure you can stand the man in the mirror." Eli looked out into the dark. "I think I can." One of the boys asked once, "You ever wish they saluted when you left?" Walter leaned against the wall, thought for a long moment. "No. If they did, I wouldn't have learned what mattered." He looked around the shop. Medals tarnish, salutes fade. But how a man lives after how he helps the next, that's what counts. Word of Walter spread further than he knew. A few old brothers came by, corpsemen, snipers, a ranger once who just stood outside and nodded before leaving. They didn't need to say much. Walter saw it in their eyes. They remembered him, still did. And in some quiet way, he'd become what the world forgot to protect. He wasn't famous. He wasn't loud. But in the lives of a few young men trying not to fall apart, he'd become something stronger than legend. He'd become real, a constant. A man who didn't need to be seen to matter, who walked through fire once and came back not with vengeance, but with tools. In the shop, there was an old plaque nailed above the workbench. No name, just an etching of a trident and 5 words. Fix what others throw away. No one asked who put it there. No one needed to. It wasn't about history. It was about today. About boys becoming men the hard way, but the right way. The last paragraph in Eli's probation file read, "Subject exhibits unusually high respect for authority figures known only as Walter. Emotional growth significant. No further recommendations." Walter read it once, smiled faintly, and shredded the page. Eli asked why. Walter said, "I'm not your file." "And you're not theirs." They never spoke of it again. Years later, Walter's chair sat empty on a quiet morning. Tools untouched, coffee still warm. Eli found the envelope on the workbench with just his name and a folded note. No explanation. Just this: if they forget me again, remind them we're still here. Not for medals. For each other, below it, a coin. Same as before? Eli didn't cry. Not then. He just put the note in his pocket and opened the shop like normal. Boys came by. New ones. Rough around the edges. He handed them a wrench. Taught them the sand edges. Fixed broken radios. Steady their hands. He didn't talk about Walter unless they asked. And even then, only a little. Because the story wasn't meant to be shouted. It was meant to be passed quietly. Man to man, like a spark carried forward. Walter Briggs never needed a statue. He just needed to know that the next one wouldn't fall through the cracks. Eli made sure of that. Every single day. Without noise. Without reward. Just like him. The courtroom never honored him. The system never did either. But the silence that followed every time his name came up men understood. Real ones. The kind who don't speak unless it matters. The kind who've carried weight so long it becomes part of their spine. And when they remember a man like Walter, they stand. Not because of orders, but because of what he carried and how he carried it. Not for glory, not for pride, but because some men were never saluted when they left, and still they gave everything. So the least we can do is remember, quietly, steadily, and if needed, fix what others throw away. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, share, and leave a name in the comments. Someone who never asked to be remembered, but deserves to be. Because some men don't need parades. They just need to be seen once and never forgotten again.